A poor boy finds a millionaire buried alive in the woods and decides to dig to save him. What seemed like just a heroic rescue ends up revealing a dark secret linked to a powerful foundation. As they flee to survive, the truth about the boy's past begins to come to light, and the millionaire discovers that his savior might be the missing son he never stopped looking for. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The scarce air and confined space were the first sensations that Robert Miller experienced as he regained consciousness. A growing suffocation took over his body, while his hands desperately felt the nearby walls. Wood. He was in a box. Panic flooded his thoughts when reality revealed itself. He had been buried alive. "Help! Someone help me!" he shouted with what little breath he had left, striking the surface above him. Accelerated breathing, cold sweat running down his forehead, his heart about to explode. Robert didn't know how he got there or why, but something inside him urged him to fight for survival. That's when he heard it. Small scratches on the wood. Someone outside. He struck the lid again with more force, ignoring the pain in his fists. The sound of earth being removed reached his ears. Minutes that seemed like an eternity. Then a beam of light invaded the darkness when a small opening formed. "There really is someone in there," exclaimed a childish voice, surprised. The opening grew until Robert could see the face of a skinny boy, no more than 10 years old, with eyes wide with astonishment. With hands dirty from soil, the boy continued digging until he created enough space for the man to emerge. "Help me, please," begged Robert, raising his arm. The boy, hesitant, extended his hand, and with a joint effort, Robert managed to escape that nightmare. Upon feeling the fresh air of the woods, he collapsed on the ground, breathing deeply, trying to calm his trembling body. "Are you okay, sir?" asked the boy, keeping a safe distance. Robert observed his savior. Simple and worn clothes, disheveled. Hair but a lively and intelligent look. A recycling collector, probably, judging by the handcart full of scrap nearby. "Yes. Thanks to you," he finally answered. How did you find me?" "I heard the noise. I thought it was an animal, but then I realized someone was knocking from under the ground." The boy spoke naturally, as if finding buried people was just another occurrence in his day. Robert tried to stand up, but dizziness prevented him. He then noticed the bruises on his arms and the dried blood on his now dirty and torn dress shirt. The last thing he remembered was being in his office, reviewing documents about financial inconsistencies he had discovered at the investment company where he was a director. "What's your name?" he asked the boy. "They call me Nick," the boy answered, still cautious. "And you?" "Robert Miller." As he pronounced his own name, a wave of memory fragments hit him. The confidential meeting, the files, the complaint he intended to make, the empty parking lot, then darkness. "I need to go to a hospital," he muttered, feeling pain throughout his body. Nick shook his head. "No hospital. They ask too many questions. There, I know a safer place." Robert wanted to protest, but something in the boy's eyes conveyed wisdom beyond his years. This child seemed to understand danger better than he did himself. "Where to then?" "To my shelter. Nobody will look for you there." With difficulty, Robert followed the boy, who pushed his recycling cart along an almost imperceptible trail in the woods. His head was buzzing with unanswered questions. Who had put him there? Why? What had he discovered that was so dangerous? As they walked, a certainty grew inside him. That unlikely encounter with Nick was not mere chance. It was the beginning of something bigger, a connection that would change their lives forever. The sun was beginning to set when Robert and Nick arrived at a remote area under a viaduct. There, between concrete pillars, was an improvised structure, made of cardboard tarps and repurposed materials. For Robert, accustomed to the luxury of his apartment in Chicago's Gold Coast, that place represented a reality check. "Is this where you live?" he asked, trying to hide the surprise in his geek's voice. Nick nodded with a mixture of pride and distrust. "I built everything myself. Nobody touches my stuff because they know I'm organized." Indeed, despite the precariousness, There was a surprising order to the place. Recyclable materials separated by type, a small space to sleep with clean blankets, and even an improvised shelf with some books salvaged from the trash. "Come in," invited the boy, pushing aside a curtain made of woven plastic bags. "Nobody will look for you here." Robert crouched to enter the shelter, feeling the pain in his body intensify. Inside, the space was surprisingly cozy. Nick lit a handmade lantern, better revealing the interior. "I need to clean." "Those wounds?" said the boy, taking a bottle of water and some pieces of clean cloth. "Where did you learn to treat injuries?" questioned Robert, intrigued by the boy's resourcefulness. "On the street, you learn a little bit of everything," Nick responded while gently cleaning the cuts on the man's arms. "You're important, aren't you? Those expensive clothes must be someone who bothered powerful people." The boy's perceptive observation made Robert reflect. As financial director of Constellation Investments, one of the largest companies in the sector in the country, he had recently discovered serious discrepancies in the balance sheets, diverted funds, shell companies, and something even more disturbing: records of transactions involving names of children and adolescents. "And I was an executive. I discovered things I shouldn't have, and they tried to silence you." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Robert nodded, feeling a chill as he remembered the coffin. "I need to contact someone I trust, maybe my assistant." "No," Nick interrupted, alarmed. "If they did this to you, they're watching everyone close to you. Cell phone, internet, everything leaves a trail." The boy was right, thought Robert. Whoever was behind this had power and resources. He needed to be cautious. "How do you know so much about these things, Nick?" The boy looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. "Life teaches you." While Nick prepared a simple meal with food he had gotten from a market at the end of the day, Robert observed the boy more carefully. There was something familiar about his features, in the shape of his eyes, in his determined chin. An uneasiness grew in his chest. "Do you have family, Nick?" "Not that I remember. I grew up in shelters until I ran away at 7. I got tired of being invisible in there." The boy's answer lit a spark in Robert's mind. 5 years ago, his wife Amber had mysteriously disappeared when she was 8 months pregnant. The searches were intense, but they never found any trace. The case was filed as a voluntary disappearance, despite Robert's protests. A few months later, he buried himself in work, becoming one of the most dedicated and successful executives in the company. "How old are you, Nick?" "About 10. Nobody knows for sure." Robert felt his heart race. The age matched, and those eyes, they were so similar to Amber's. Do you have any personal object? Something that has always been with you?" The boy hesitated, then searched in a small improvised chest for an object wrapped in a piece of fabric. He carefully unwrapped it, revealing a small embroidered cloth with the initials RM intertwined. "This was with me when they left me, at the first shelter. They say I was only a few days old." The initials, Robert Miller, the same embroidery that Amber had made for the baby's layette. "May I?" he asked, extending his trembling hand. Upon touching the fabric, Robert felt as if the world around him disappeared. That was the proof he needed, the impossible coincidence that could only mean one thing. Nick was not just the boy who had saved him from the ground. He was his son. The revelation hit Robert like an unexpected storm. The small embroidered cloth in his hands represented more than a coincidence. It was the confirmation of a bond that fate had woven in the most unlikely circumstances. His son, the one he never got to know, was now there, sitting in front of him, observing him with distrustful eyes. "This embroidery," murmured Robert, his voice choked with emotion. "My wife made it. For our baby." Nick frowned, his expression oscillating between curiosity and disbelief. "What are you trying to say?" "Nick, I believe that you're my son." The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. The boy instinctively backed away like a wild animal facing a trap. "That's a lie," he retorted finally, his voice laden with distrust. "Adults always make up stories when they want something." Robert took a deep breath, understanding the defensive reaction. How many times had that boy been deceived or disappointed? "I can prove it," he responded calmly. My wife Amber was pregnant when she disappeared 10 years ago. The baby was due in a month. She embroidered these initials, R.M. Robert Miller, on the entire layette. The boy looked at the small cloth, then at the man in front of him, evaluating his words. If that's true, why did you never look for me? The question hit Robert like a blow. I did look, Nick, for years. The police filed the case as a voluntary disappearance, but I never believed that. Amber would never abandon our child. For the first time, Nick seemed genuinely interested. What happened to her? I don't know, admitted Robert, feeling the weight of that uncertainty he had carried for a decade. One day she went out for a medical appointment and never came back. The car was found in the hospital parking lot, but of her no trace. The boy reflected for a few moments, processing that story that could change everything he knew about himself. If I really am your son, what will happen? To me, the question was simple, but loaded with implications. Robert realized he needed to act with caution. First, we need to confirm this officially. A DNA test can prove our relationship. Then, I want to give you everything you deserve. A home, education, security. I don't want charity, interrupted Nick with pride. I've managed on my own until now. It's not charity, Nick. It's your right. Robert paused, choosing his words carefully. But before anything else, we need to understand what happened. If you really are my son, it means someone separated you from your mother when you were born. And that is connected to what I discovered in the company with the reason why they tried to bury me alive. The mention of the coffin made Nick visibly shudder. As mature as he seemed, he was still just a child. How will we find out without them finding you? Robert smiled slightly, admiring the boy's intelligence. I have a friend, Sarah, who works at an independent forensic laboratory. She can do the test discreetly. The next morning, after a restless night in the improvised shelter, Robert and Nick walked to a small cafe in the city center. From there, using a public phone, Robert contacted Sarah, an old college friend whom he trusted completely. The meeting was set for that same afternoon, in a busy park. Sarah, a 40-year-old woman with a serene expression and a perceptive gaze, greeted Robert with evident surprise. My God, Robert, everyone thinks you disappeared. It's in the newspapers, on television. It's a long story, Sarah, but I need your help now. He indicated the boy at his side. This is Nick, I believe. He might be my son with Amber. Sarah looked at the boy with scientific interest and then at Robert again. The resemblance is remarkable, she commented, but we need concrete evidence. Discreetly, she collected DNA samples from both and promised results in 48 hours. Robert, she said before leaving, be careful. Whoever did this to you won't give up easily. As they returned to the shelter, Robert noticed that Nick seemed different, less distrustful, more thoughtful. And if the test is positive? The boy suddenly asked, what will change? Everything, Robert replied with sincerity, and nothing at the same time. I'll be your father on paper, as I already am in my heart since I saw you. But the choice to accept me as a father, that will always be yours. Nick nodded, absorbing those words. For the first time in his young life, he glimpsed the possibility of belonging to someone, of having a name, a history, an identity beyond the streets. The 48 hours of waiting for the test results seemed like an eternity for Robert and Nick. During that time, both remained cautious, moving only when necessary, always alert to any sign that they were being watched. To pass the time and gain the boy's trust, Robert began to share stories about Amber, how they met in college, the simple but happy marriage, the plans they made for the future with the baby's arrival. She had a laugh that lit up any room, Robert recounted as they shared an improvised lunch. And she was stubborn, exactly like you. Nick smiled discreetly, a rare gesture that Robert treasured as a small victory. What did she do? What did she work as? She was an obstetric nurse at St. Francis Hospital, Robert answered, feeling a familiar tightness in his chest when speaking of her in the past. She loved helping bring children into the world. Something in Nick's expression changed upon hearing the hospital's name. St. Francis, Are you sure? Absolutely. Why? My shelter documents, they said I was found near that hospital. The information made Robert's heart race. Another piece fitting into the puzzle. On the appointed day, they met Sarah in the same park. She brought a discreet folder and a serious expression. The result is positive, Robert, she announced without beating around the bush. The probability of paternity is above 99.9%. Nick is, without a doubt, your biological son. Despite already intuiting the answer, the scientific confirmation hit Robert with unexpected force. Silent tears ran down his face as he looked at the boy who now officially was his son. Nick remained silent, his eyes fixed on the ground, processing the meaning of that revelation. There's one more thing, continued Sarah, hesitant. I did a search in the National Missing Persons System using the genetic profile. I found a partial match that indicates Nick's biological mother is alive. Amber. Robert's voice failed between hope and disbelief. I can't say for certain, explained. Sarah, the DNA corresponds to that of an unidentified woman who was admitted 9 years ago to a psychiatric clinic in Lake Forest outside the city. She was found wandering the streets without documents and apparently without memory. The news fell like a bomb. Could Amber have been alive all this time, just a few hours away? We need to go there, Robert decided immediately. It's not that simple, warned Sarah. The patient doesn't receive visitors and there are a series of restrictions. Besides, you two are in danger. Robert, officially you're missing and there are rumors that the police consider you a suspect of fraud at Constellation Investments. What? Exclaimed Robert, incredulous. They're framing me. Exactly. Whoever tried to get rid of you is now trying to destroy your reputation. Fake documents were found in your office, suggesting that you planned to flee the country with millions in embezzled funds. Nick, who until then had been following the conversation in silence, finally spoke. Up. If they try to register my name as his son now, they'll find him. Sarah nodded, impressed by the boy's perspicacity. That's right. Any attempt to formalize your relationship will trigger alerts in the system. So what do we do? Asked Robert, feeling cornered. I have a friend, Dr. Helen Morris, who worked at St. Francis at the same time as Amber, answered Sarah. She retired 5 years ago, but maybe she can help us understand what happened. That same afternoon, they went to meet Dr. Helen, a 70-year-old woman who received them in her modest apartment in the suburbs. Upon hearing the story and seeing Nick, her eyes widened in recognition. My God, it's like seeing a ghost, she murmured. You're identical to your mother, child. You knew my wife? Asked Robert, anxious. Of course I did. Amber was one of the best nurses I've ever known. Helen sighed heavily. And one of the bravest. That's why they tried to silence her. What? How do you mean? Robert felt a chill run down his spine. Helen rose with difficulty and went to a bookshelf, from which she removed a dusty box. From inside, she extracted a sealed envelope. Amber gave me this a few days before she disappeared. She said if something happened to her, I should give this to you. She extended the envelope to Robert. But you disappeared too, soon after. I tried to look for you, but I was advised not to get involved, so I kept this, hoping that one day you would appear. With trembling hands, Robert opened the envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten letter in Amber's delicate handwriting. The first words already made clear the gravity of the situation. Robert, if you're reading this, it means my suspicions were correct. I discovered something terrible happening at the hospital. Robert sat down, his legs weakening as his eyes scanned Amber's letter. Each of her words was like a whisper from the past, bringing to light a frightening truth that had remained hidden for years. Amber discovered a baby-swapping scheme at the hospital, he explained. His voice choked. Newborns from vulnerable families were declared to have non-existent complications and then reported as deceased, while in reality they were sent for illegal adoptions. Helen nodded gravely. Your wife noticed strange patterns, healthy children, who suddenly developed complications shortly after birth, always under the care of the same professionals, always at specific times when supervision was minimal. She gathered evidence, continued Robert, still reading the letter. Inconsistent. Records, forged signatures, impossible coincidences between cases. And she discovered that everything was connected to the New Dawn Foundation. The foundation of Constellation Investments, confirmed Helen, supposedly dedicated to helping underprivileged children, but Amber suspected it was a front for something much more sinister. Nick, who had been listening to everything in silence, finally spoke up. "Is that what happened to me? Was I sold?" The rawness of the question made Robert shudder. How to explain something so horrible to a child? "You were never abandoned, Nick," he replied, carefully choosing his words. "You were taken from us, and we're going to find out exactly how that happened." Helen approached the boy, her kind eyes studying every detail of the childlike face. "You were born at St. Francis, I have no doubt about that. The shape of the eyes, the chin, it's Amber in miniature, with traits of the father." She turned to Robert. "Does the flash drive contain the evidence your wife gathered?" "Yes, records, photos, digitized, documents." Robert held the small device as if it were a precious treasure. "She writes that she was about to report everything to the authorities when she realized she was being followed. And then they made her disappear," completed Helen, with bitterness. "But they didn't count on her being prepared. Amber was always 3 steps ahead of everyone." Robert inserted the flash drive into the laptop that Sarah had brought. "The files were protected by a password. The most important date of our lives," read Robert aloud, following the hint in the letter. He thought for a moment and typed 051219998, May 12th, 1998, the day they met in college. The files opened, revealing dozens of meticulously organized documents. Amber had catalogued each suspicious case in the 3 years prior to her disappearance. Names, dates, clinical details, inconsistencies in the records. "Here," pointed Sarah, indicating a specific folder. Records from May and June 2015. Robert opened the folder, his heart racing. And there it was, Amber Miller's medical record, indicating that she had been admitted to the hospital with premature labor on June 15th. The record showed the birth, say, of a healthy boy, but a later notation in different handwriting indicated severe respiratory complications and finally, death. "It's a forgery," concluded Helen, examining the document. "The signature of the responsible doctor. I know it well, Dr. Marcus Taylor." "Does he still work at the hospital?" asked Robert. "No. A few months after these events, he was promoted to medical director of Horizon Clinic, a luxury private institution funded by Constellation Investments." The connections were becoming increasingly clear. Robert continued exploring the files until he found something that made his blood run cold, a list of donors and beneficiaries encoded in an apparently harmless spreadsheet of hospital expenses. "Look at this," called Sarah, who was analyzing another set of data. "There's a pattern in the financial transfers. Always 3 days after each complication, a substantial deposit was made into Dr. Taylor's personal account, coming from subsidiary companies of Constellation." "And the babies?" asked Nick with surprising maturity for his age. "Where did they go?" Robert found another file, a list of addresses of shelters and foster care institutions, all somehow linked to the New Dawn Foundation. Comparing with the records of complications, they noticed that several babies had been sent to these institutions under false identities. "Here," Helen pointed to one of the records. "Rebirth Institute, June 18th, 2015. Admission of a 3-day-old newborn, parents unknown, found near St. Francis Hospital." "That was my first shelter," confirmed Nick, recognizing the name. As they processed these discoveries, a noise at the door caught everyone's attention. Helen rose to check, but before she got there, the doorbell rang. 3 short rings, a pause, 2 long rings. "It's Jack," said Helen, visibly relieved. "My nephew works in security at the hospital. I asked him to come as soon as possible." Jack. A robust man in uniform entered with a grave expression. "Aunt Helen, you were right. Someone is monitoring access to the old hospital archives. Today, 2 men in suits asked about records from 2015, specifically about the nurse, Amber Miller." Robert and Sarah exchanged worried looks. The net was closing in. "We need to act quickly," declared Robert, rising with determination. "First, Let's go to the psychiatric clinic in Lake Forest. If that woman is really Amber, we need to get her out of there." "What about the evidence?" questioned Sarah. "If you make this public now, you'll become immediate targets." "We already are targets," replied Robert, placing his hand on Nick's shoulder. "The difference is that now we know who our enemies are, and they have no idea what we have against them." The trip to Lake Forest was tense and silent. Robert, Nick, and Sarah traveled in a car borrowed from Jack, with temporary documents provided by Dr. Helen's contacts. With each road sign, with each curve on the winding road that climbed the hills, Robert felt his heart accelerate. The possibility of reuniting with Amber after so many years seemed both a dream and a nightmare. A dream for the reunion, a nightmare for the circumstances. "What if she doesn't recognize me?" asked Robert almost to himself as he watched the misty landscape through the window. Sarah, who drove with redoubled attention, answered without taking her eyes off the road. "We'll face that when we get there, one step at a time." In the back seat, Nick remained quiet, hugging his worn backpack where he had stored the small embroidered cloth, his only material connection to a past that only now was beginning to make sense. Occasionally, his gaze met Robert's in the rear view mirror, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "What is she like?" the boy suddenly asked. "My mother." The question caught Robert off guard. How to describe Amber? How to transform into words the essence of someone who had been his entire world? "She has eyes exactly like yours," he began, feeling a lump in his throat. Determined, observant, always saw what others didn't see. She had a laugh that brightened any room, and hands that seemed able to fix anything broken. Nick nodded, absorbing each detail like someone memorizing precious instructions. Spring Valley Clinic was located away from the city center, in a wooded area, where old mansions converted into hospitals and rest homes hid among well-maintained gardens. Unlike the somber image that the term psychiatric clinic might evoke, the place had a welcoming appearance, with a well-preserved facade and colorful flowers framing the entrance. According to the plan elaborated at Helen's house, Sarah presented herself at the reception as Dr. Campos, a psychiatrist from Chicago, interested in a specific case for academic research. Robert assumed the role of her assistant, while Nick would wait in the car. "Absolutely not," protested the boy when they explained this part of the plan to him. "If she's my mother, I have the right to see her too." The determination in his eyes reminded Robert so much of Amber that he couldn't argue. "All right, but you stay close to me at all times, understood?" The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with an efficient air, listened to Sarah's story with professional interest. "The patient you mention, let me check." Her fingers slid across the keyboard as she consulted the system. "Ah yes, patient 217. She's been with us for 9 years. Case of severe dissociative amnesia without prior documentation. We would like to talk to her, if possible," requested Sarah with serene authority. "I believe her case could be crucial for my research on trauma and memory suppression." The receptionist hesitated. "Normally, we would need prior authorization from the management, but..." She looked at the clock. "Dr. Taylor only returns on Monday. If it's a brief visit, I can make an exception." The name made Robert and Sarah exchange quick glances. Dr. Taylor, the same doctor mentioned in Amber's documents, another connection confirmed. A nurse was called to guide them through the impeccably clean corridors of the clinic. With each step, Robert felt his heart beating, stronger, his hands cold with sweat, his breathing becoming irregular. Beside him, Nick walked in silence, his attentive eyes capturing every detail. "Patient 217 has made significant progress in recent years," explained the nurse as they walked. "When she arrived, she barely spoke or reacted. Today she interacts, although she still hasn't recovered specific memories of her previous life." They stopped in front of a white door, just like so many others in the corridor. The nurse knocked softly before opening it. "Hello, I have visitors for you today. Some doctors interested in meeting you." Robert took a hesitant step into the simple but comfortable room, and then time seemed to freeze. Sitting in an armchair near the window with an open book in her lap and her gaze turned to the external garden was Amber. Older, thinner, with premature grey strands in her once completely brown hair but unmistakably amber. His wife, the mother of his son. She turned slowly upon hearing the footsteps, a polite and vague smile on her lips. "Hello," she greeted with a soft voice. "Sorry for the disorganization. I wasn't expecting visitors." Robert remained paralyzed, unable to speak. It was Sarah who took the initiative, introducing herself and explaining the fictitious reason for the visit. Amber listened attentively, nodding occasionally. And then her gaze fell on Nick, who was partially hidden behind Robert. Something changed in her expression, a spark of recognition, perhaps, or an instinctive connection that not even amnesia could erase. "And who is this young man?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the boy. Nick took a step forward, guided by an impulse that even he didn't understand. "My name is Nick," he said simply. Amber tilted her head slightly, as if trying to capture a fleeting memory. "Nick," she repeated slowly. "What an interesting name." And then, to everyone's surprise, she extended her hand and touched the boy's face with delicacy. "Your eyes remind me of someone." "Amber," Robert finally managed to say, his voice almost a whisper. "My name is Robert Miller." Upon hearing the name, she frowned, confused. Her hand, still near Nick's face, began to tremble slightly. Do I know you?" she asked, her voice now uncertain. Robert took a step forward, careful not to alarm her. "Yes, you know me better than anyone in the world." Nick, in a surprising gesture, took the small embroidered cloth from his backpack and extended it to Amber. "Is this yours? Did you make this for me?" Amber looked at the embroidery, her trembling hands touching the initials RM. And then, like a dam breaking, tears began to stream down her face, silent at first, then accompanied by sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "My baby," she whispered, looking at Nick with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. "My son." Amber's recognition triggered a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. The nurse, witnessing the emotional scene, was visibly moved but also alarmed. "I need to call the doctor on duty," she said, quickly moving away. Sarah, perceiving the imminent danger, discreetly blocked the door. "We need to get out of here now." Robert nodded, understanding the urgency. "Amber," he called gently, holding her hands, "I know it's confusing, but we need you to come with us. You're not sick. You never were. They kept you here against your will for almost 10 years. Amber looked at her husband and then at her son, her eyes reflecting an internal battle between confusion and the instinctive trust she felt for those people. "I have flashes," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Dreams that seem like memories. A baby, blood, someone chasing me. They always told me they were delusions, part of my condition." "They're not delusions," affirmed Robert. "They're your true memories trying to emerge." Nick, with the emotional intelligence he had developed on the streets, approached and held Amber's hand. "We need to go, Mom." The word Mom, pronounced for the first time, had a powerful effect. Amber stood up, suddenly decided. "Let's go." The group quickly left the room, avoiding the main corridors. Sarah, who had studied the clinic's floor, planned before the visit, guided them to a secondary exit near the kitchen. In minutes, they were in the car, driving back to the road that descended from the hills. "They'll come after us," said Amber, her voice firmer now, as if each mile that distanced her from the clinic brought her more back to herself. "Dr. Taylor has powerful connections. I always knew it was he who controlled my stay there, even when other doctors suggested my release." Robert held her hand over the car's center console. "We're prepared. Helen and Jack are helping us, and Sarah has contacts in the district attorney's office." During the journey back to New York, Amber constantly looked at Nick as if afraid he would disappear if she looked away for too long. "How did you survive all these years?" she finally asked. Nick told his story, the impersonal shelters, the escape to the streets, life as a recycling collector, the unlikely encounter with Robert. Each word made Amber alternate between silent tears and expressions of pride for her son's resilience. "You're exactly as I imagined you would be," she said, caressing the boy's hair. "Strong, independent, smart." When they arrived in New York, They didn't return to Nick's shelter or to Helen's house. Sarah took them to a small farm on the outskirts of the city, a family property, rarely used and difficult to trace. In the days that followed, as they recovered and planned their next steps, Amber began to recover more memories. Painful fragments that, like pieces of a macabre puzzle, revealed the horror of what she had lived through. "I was about to report everything," she recounted one night as the four dined on the porch. "I had copied records, photographed documents, gathered enough evidence to bring down the entire scheme, but someone found out." She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the house lights. "On the day I disappeared, I went to the prenatal office as usual, but I noticed something strange. Dr. Taylor was there, although it wasn't his day to see patients. He insisted on examining me personally." Robert and Sarah exchanged concerned looks, while Nick listened with absolute attention. During the examination, he applied something. "An injection," he said, was a vitamin. "I immediately started to feel dizzy. The last thing I remember is being taken for an emergency on a stretcher. After that, only fragments, pain, surgical lights, voices discussing whether they should eliminate her for good." "They induced labor," concluded Robert, horrified. Amber nodded. "And then, drugs. Many drugs to keep me confused, to destroy my memories. When I finally woke up, I was in the clinic, without documents, without identity, diagnosed with disorders I never had." Robert's anger grew with each revelation, but also his determination. "We're going to expose all of this," he promised. "Everyone involved will pay for what they did." It was Sarah who brought a more strategic perspective. "We need to be smart. These people have power, money, and influence. We have to build a solid case and protect the three of you in the process." The solution came from an unexpected source. The next morning, Jack appeared at the farm with important news. "Constellation Investments is holding a big charity event next week," he informed. "The entire board will be present, including Dr. Taylor, who is now a board member of the New Dawn Foundation. It will be at the Metropolitan Theater with press coverage." "It's our chance," decided Robert, a plan beginning to form in his mind. The following days were dedicated to meticulous preparation. Sarah organized the evidence into an irrefutable dossier, including Amber's records, Nick's DNA test results, records of suspicious financial transfers, and testimonies from hospital employees that Helen had managed to contact discreetly. In parallel, Robert worked on another front. Using old contacts who still trusted him, he secured space on a respected investigative journalism blog. The story would be published simultaneously with the confrontation they planned for the event. Amber, meanwhile, focused on recovering her strength, both physical and emotional. Each day brought more clarity, more determination. "They didn't just take years of my life," she said one night. "They tried to erase my existence, and they almost succeeded." Nick, observing the transformation of the family he never knew he had, was also changing. The distrustful and wary boy from the streets was beginning to allow himself moments of vulnerability, of affection, of belonging. On the eve of the big event, the four sat down to review every detail of the plan. The atmosphere was one of apprehension, but also of a strange peace, the peace that comes from the certainty of doing what is right, regardless of the consequences. "Tomorrow," said Robert, looking at Amber and Nick, "we begin a new life, as the family we always should have been." The Metropolitan Theater in New York City glittered on the night of the New Dawn Foundation's charity event. Limousines paraded at the entrance, disembarking illustrious businessmen, influential politicians, and celebrities. Photographers vied for the best angle, while reporters approached guests for brief interviews about their commitment to the cause of underprivileged children. In a car parked a few meters away, Robert adjusted the suit borrowed from Jack. Beside him, Amber, almost unrecognizable in an elegant blue dress and freshly dyed hair, breathed deeply to control her nervousness. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Robert, holding her hand. "We can still just go with Plan B, let the report and the district attorney's office do the work." Amber squeezed his hand back, her eyes shining with determination. "I'm sure. I need to look them in the eyes. I need them to see that they didn't manage to silence me." In the back seat, Nick and Sarah reviewed their parts in the plan. The boy seemed strangely calm, as if his entire life on the streets had prepared him for this moment. "Remember," instructed Sarah, "as soon as the confusion starts, Jack will escort the three of you to the side exit. The car will be waiting, and we'll go straight to the newspaper office, where the reporting team will be ready." The group split up as planned. Sarah and Nick entered first, using fake credentials that identified them as representatives of a school benefited by the foundation. They positioned themselves strategically near the side exit, where Jack, in his security uniform, was already waiting. 15 minutes later, Robert and Amber entered through the main lobby. The transformation in Amber's appearance was sufficient to avoid immediate recognition, but didn't completely hide her resemblance to the young nurse who had disappeared 10 years before. The main hall was packed. On the stage, a large screen displayed moving images of smiling children in institutions supported by the foundation, while soft instrumental music accompanied guests circulating among tables of canapes and champagne flutes. Robert quickly identified the main targets: Charles Anderson, CEO of Constellation Investments; Judge Paul Mitchell, known for his work on behalf of children; and of course Dr. Marcus Taylor, now presented as medical director and advisor to the foundation. "There he is," whispered Amber, her body tense upon recognizing the man who had stolen so many years of her life. "Let's wait for the right moment," replied Robert, guiding her discreetly among the guests, avoiding being noticed. The moment came when Charles Anderson took the stage for the opening speech. As he spoke about commitment to the future of American children and transparency in social actions, Robert and Amber positioned themselves near the first row. "And it is with great pride that we announce the expansion of the New Horizons program, which will benefit 5,000 more children across the country," announced Anderson to enthusiastic applause. It was at that moment that Robert stepped forward. "Including children like my son, who had his identity stolen by you." A shocked silence fell over the hall. All heads turned toward the voice that had interrupted the speech. "Security!" called Anderson quickly, recovering from the surprise. "Please remove this man." "That won't be necessary," replied Robert, advancing down the central aisle. Robert Miller, former financial director of Constellation Investments, reported as missing. "Remember me, Charles? Or perhaps what I discovered in the company's accounting books?" On stage, Anderson visibly paled. In the audience, Dr. Taylor began to discreetly retreat toward the exit. "And perhaps Dr. Taylor remembers me," said Amber, stepping forward to stand beside Robert. "Amber Miller, obstetric nurse at St. Francis Hospital, the one you tried to silence after I discovered the baby trafficking scheme." Shocked murmurs ran through the hall. Journalists present began to photograph and record while security guards hesitated, not knowing how to proceed in front of the cameras. "This is absurd. This woman is clearly disturbed," protested Dr. Taylor, trying to control the situation. "And this man is wanted for embezzlement." "Really?" replied Robert, his voice amplified by the perfect acoustics of the theater. "Then how do you explain that my son, declared deceased in your medical records, is alive?" Nick, following the agreed signal, approached from the other side of the hall, escorted by Sarah. A growing buzz took over the environment when guests noticed the incredible resemblance between the boy and Amber. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," continued Robert, addressing the journalists directly, "in your emails you just received a complete dossier on Operation Nursery, a systematic scheme of taking babies from vulnerable families, falsifying deaths, and illegal adoptions, all coordinated by the New Dawn Foundation with the connivance of medical and judicial authorities." On stage, Charles Anderson desperately tried to regain control. "This is defamation, an absurd conspiracy to tarnish our reputation." "We have documentary evidence, Mr. Anderson," intervened Sarah, stepping forward. "Altered medical records, suspicious financial transfers, testimonies from hospital employees, and, most importantly, DNA tests confirming the boy's identity as the biological son of Robert and Amber Miller." By this point, several guests were already heading for the exits, while others, especially journalists, approached to hear better. On stage, Judge Paul Mitchell discreetly tried to call someone, visibly disturbed. "For 10 years, spoke Amber, her voice choked with emotion but firm, "I was kept sedated in a psychiatric clinic, so I couldn't tell what I discovered. My son was placed in a shelter as an orphan, while my husband was reported missing when he tried to expose the financial irregularities that sustained this scheme." Amber's words caused a commotion. Several people took out their cell phones to record that historic moment, while others called newspaper offices and TV stations. "But we are here today," concluded Robert, pulling Nick and Amber close to him, forming the perfect image of the reunited family, not just to denounce but to tell all the other families separated by this criminal organization not to give up. The truth always finds a way. In the days and weeks that followed, the repercussion was overwhelming. Operation Nursery, as it became known in the press, became one of the country's biggest scandals. The evidence gathered by Amber, added to Robert's financial discoveries, led to the preventive arrest of dozens of people involved, including Charles Anderson, Dr. Taylor, and Judge Mitchell. More importantly, the exposure of the case led other families to seek the authorities with similar stories. Children reported as deceased under suspicious circumstances, mothers who were never allowed to see the bodies, inconsistent hospital records. A special task force was created by the district attorney's office to investigate each case, and DNA tests began to reunite families separated for years. 6 months later, Robert, Amber, and Nick, now officially registered as Nicholas Miller, inaugurated the Living Hope Support Center, dedicated to helping families searching for missing children and children without official records. The place, installed in a restored old mansion, had become a national reference in children's and adolescents' rights. On a sunny afternoon, as she watched Nicholas helping other children newly arrived at the center, Amber approached Robert. "On the porch. Sometimes I still can't believe we made it," she confessed, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. Robert smiled, embracing her. "You know what Nick told me the day he found me buried? That sometimes we need to dig deep to find what really matters." Amber looked at her son, her miracle child, playing with the other children, his laughter echoing through the garden. The pain of the past would never be completely forgotten, but it had transformed into something new, a purpose, a mission, a legacy of hope for other families. "He's right," replied Amber, her eyes shining with love and determination. "And we'll keep digging for all the children who are still waiting to be found." In the sky, the sun was beginning to set, painting the horizon in golden and orange tones. The promise of a new dawn for families who, like theirs, had rediscovered not only each other, but also their own identity.